So, I'm not saying that anyone in here has minimal biology knowledge, but if that statement were to apply to you, you can still pass your AP exam. The passing score is about 50% of the points on the multiple choice section and 50% of the points on the FRQ section. For the FRQ section, you're going to need a little bit more biology knowledge. Still not a ton, but a little bit more. But on the multiple choice section, I believe that anyone should be able to get 50% on a multiple choice test, no matter what the content, no matter if you've seen it before, as long as you know how the test works and as long as you know about taking multiple choice tests. So today we're going to talk about the format of the AP Biology exam and how you can pass it even without that much knowledge. All right, so number one, you need to know the general structure of the exam. First of all, it comes in two parts. You're going to be in there for 3 hours plus, right? So you have 3 hours of actual time to take this exam. 90 minutes of it is going to be for the free response section and 90 minutes for the multiple choice section, right? For the free response, you're going to be given 8 total questions, right? And to do that, you'll have 80 minutes to write and 10 minutes to read. They used to separate this and not let you open your book, not let you open your answer book until those 10 minutes were up. They no longer do that. They don't care anymore if you use that time for whatever. They're just gonna let you do 90 minutes worth. Okay. Questions 1 and 2 are going to be worth 10 points each. Questions 3, 4, and 5 are worth 4 points. 6, 7, and 8 are worth 3 points, right? So what this means is, if you're paying attention, 6, 7, and 8 are worth 9 points combined. And question 1 and 2 are worth 10 points each. So if you're spending an equal amount of time on each question, you are doing it wrong. Do not do that because that is really going to screw you over, right? Questions 1 and 2, the questions are going to be more difficult to get the points. There's going to be less easy points versus 3 through 8. There's generally going to be 1 point that's really simple that everybody will get, and then the other 2 will be harder. But in questions 1 and 2, right, that 1 point represents a lower amount of the total points for those questions. So, moral of the story, you should spend more time on questions 1 and 2. How much more time? We'll talk about in a second. During your reading time, this is what you should do. You should label the point values. As of last year, they put the point values on the questions for you. So they said, question 1, 10 points. Question 2, 10 points, right? That's awesome. Now you don't have to do that. The next thing you should do is underline or circle every bold word in a question and the capital words. You're going to use those to figure out where the points are coming from, right? So for instance, if we said describe photosynthesis and cellular respiration, how many points is that worth? 1, right? So describe is a 1 point question. But this one says describe photosynthesis and cellular respiration with a capital and. How many points is that worth? 2, because you're describing photosynthesis and describing cellular respiration. That's why the capital words matter, okay? Read the questions and make notes to yourself if you need to, but the point here is to make sure you know where the questions are, or where the points are going to come from, okay? During your writing time, you're going to budget your time. Give yourself 15 minutes for questions 1 and 2, 5 minutes for each of the other questions, okay? I highly recommend, and we'll talk about this later, that you bring in a watch, right? It can't be a smart watch, but you can bring in any other, dumb watch, or you can actually bring in a stopwatch. Bring that in, start it, give yourself 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, move on to question 2. After 15 more minutes, move on to question 3. After 5 more minutes, move on to question 4. Even if you don't finish, if you do it like this, you are going to end up with 20 extra minutes to divide up as you need, right? So that 20 extra minutes, you can go back and then finish any questions that you didn't finish. But what we constantly see is questions 6, 7, and 8 have the lowest amount of points, right? And the lowest amount of points is always associated with DNA. And that's not deoxyribonucleic acid. That's did not answer, right? There was no answer for 6, 7, and 8. That's just giving away points. So don't do that. Make sure you devote at least 5 minutes to each question, and then you can go back and do more afterwards if you need to, but make sure you do the original 5, okay? As you're writing the answers, check off the bold words. So as you describe photosynthesis, put a check next to describe photosynthesis. As you describe cellular respiration, put a check next to describe cellular respiration. The other thing that we constantly see when we're looking at sample responses is the number of students that don't even attempt to answer the question, right? You have to address each bold word. If you don't address the bold words, you are not going to get the points for it, right? So just once you think that you've addressed it, put a check next to it so you can move on, right? So for point values, these are your one pointers. Identify, describe, predict, propose, select, right? So identify, you're just looking for a key term. It would say something like, identify the organelle involved in photosynthesis. And you would say, the organelle involved in photosynthesis is the chloroplast, right? Done. That's your point, okay? Describe is a little different. Describe might say, the chloroplast is involved in photosynthesis. Describe how the structure of the chloroplast allows photosynthesis to occur. And then you would say, the chloroplast contains a double membrane, and it is inside of its membranes, it has thylakoids, and then H+ ions are pumped into the thylakoid space to allow for chemiosmotic gradient. Cool, you've done it. But it's, like I said, it's more than just shouting out a key term. Predict. Predict is a weird one, and it's less likely to be used now because all of the open-ended answers you can get. You guys remember way back when we did a consider the following about what would happen if the inner membrane of the mitochondria became permeable to H+ ions? Okay? If there was a question that said, predict what would happen if the inner membrane of the mitochondria became permeable to H+ ions, and you wrote, I predict that the pH of the mitochondrial matrix will be equal to the pH of the intermembrane space. Because if it's permeable to H+ ions and H+ ions are what changes pH, then the H+ ions will be able to diffuse between the two membranes. Okay? Did you answer the question the way that they wanted you to answer it? No, right? They were probably looking for something about ATP production, rate of ATP production, ability for the mitochondria to do its job, right? But did you make a valid prediction? Did you justify your valid prediction? Yes, they must give you the points for that, right? If you predicted something that was related to what they asked for and you justified it properly, you will get the points for it, okay? As a result of that, that's becoming less likely because now they're using this select thing where they're giving you maybe 5 options of predictions and they're asking you to select which of those predictions will happen and then justify it. And of those predictions, the ones that you're selecting, 2 of them may be correct, right? 2 of them may be plausible, and so you'll select one of those 2 and then give the correct justification based on it, okay? Propose a model. So this would be giving some simple description for what's happening. So let's say it says something like a fruit fly is placed, or 10 fruit flies are placed into a chamber with a ripe tomato on one side and an unripe tomato on the other side, right? And you find that the fruit flies fly towards the ripe tomato and not towards the unripe tomato. And so it says propose a model or propose a mechanism of this. And you may say, okay, well, I think that the fruit flies have a positive chemotaxis towards ethanol, right? Or towards ethylene gas, rather, not ethanol, towards ethylene gas, right? So ethylene gas is a hormone, right? It's given off by ripening fruits. And a positive chemotaxis would mean that the flies would go towards it. Done. Great. Now, could there be other things that you could have said? Yes. So on the answer sheet, it's going to say any valid model proposed would give you a point. Okay? 2-point questions. Explain, justify, calculate. Right? So explain is the exact same as identify plus describe. Right? So it might say explain how the organelle involved in photosynthesis allows for the production of ATP, right? And then you just say the organelle involved in photosynthesis is the chloroplast, and it allows for the production of ATP because it contains a double membrane with thylakoids, and it can pump H+ ions into the thylakoid space to flow out through ATP synthase. Again, the exact same answer as the questions from before, but instead of having identify plus describe, it's just explain. Justify is another one. So justify can either be worth 2 points if it's on its own or 1 point if it's paired with a predict. Basically, if it's paired with a predict, you just need to say why your prediction is plausible. Okay. Last one is calculate or perform. Calculate, you'll always get 1 point for the final answer, 1 point for showing your work. Make sure you don't skip your work. Make sure you don't do it just in your calculator. Make sure you write it down on the piece of paper. Okay. Multi-part answers. Draw a graph would be worth a bunch of points, right? So here are some things you should do when you draw a graph. Make sure your independent variable is on your x-axis, your dependent variable is on your y-axis. You should select the correct type of graph. So a scatter plot, if both of your data types, so your independent and dependent variable, are both numerical, you're going to use a scatter plot, right? That's two axes, and then you plot the dots, right? Don't connect the dots, that's a line graph. If they ask you to connect the dots, do it, but otherwise don't, okay? If they ask you to draw a line of best fit, you just try to draw the best line that connects all your dots, but it doesn't have to go through and be a zigzag line, it's going to be a straight line, right? Don't draw a line of best fit if they don't ask you to draw a line of best fit. Just draw the dots, okay? If one of your pieces of data, usually your independent variable, is arbitrary, don't use a scatter plot. In other words, let's say I had 5 sites in the ocean, 5 random sites, and I called them site 1, site 2, site 3, site 4, site 5, and then I sampled the number of crabs in each one of the sites, right? And then I drew my graph, and I was like, okay, look, in site 1, there were 25. In site 2, there were 50. In site 3, there were 75. In site 4, there were 100. In site 5, there was 125. Right? And I'd be like, look, there's a perfect correlation between site number and number of crabs found. Is that true? Yeah, but does it have anything to do with anything? No, because I labeled the sites arbitrarily, so I shouldn't draw a line of best fit there because the site numbers are just arbitrarily named, right? And that was random chance that happens. So instead, do a bar graph, because a bar graph implies that x-axis doesn't have any meaning to it, right? Make sure you have reasonable scales. If your graph is this big and all of your data is in this section of it in the very bottom, that you did not pick the correct scale. It should spread out through your entire graph. And then make sure that each of the tick marks on the graph represents the same value. Don't have this one be 0 to 1 and then this one be 1 to 10. And this one be 10 to 15, right? That doesn't make any sense. Make sure that each one is worth the same amount, right? 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. Make sure you have a title and an axis labels for your graph, right? And make sure you include units. There's probably going to be a point associated with this. So if you answer question 8 and it says draw a graph, right? You're going to get 1 out of 3 points, 33% of the points for drawing a graph, putting a title on it, and labeling the axes, even if it's wrong, right? So don't give those points away. For design an experiment, these are the things you should do. Label the independent and dependent variable, say what they are. You should say what your control group is. Say, my control group is going to do this, and that's going to allow me to test for my null hypothesis or something like that. List what your hypothesis is and your null hypothesis. Your hypothesis should always have the same sort of ring to it. It's going to be a prediction and then a because. If I do this, this will happen because, right? The null hypothesis is going to be something about no interactions occurring. So you can always say for the null hypothesis, my null hypothesis is that all of the changes are due to random chance. That can be the null hypothesis for every single experiment ever. Okay. Mention the sampling method, by which I mean you should say I used random sampling. Just write that. I don't even care. Just write I used random sampling, no matter what. If they ask you to design the sample, say random sampling, because there's probably going to be a point that says sampling method is mentioned, right? And then random sampling is a good one. What's up?
With something like that, are we able to just do like not bullet points necessarily, but just be like?
No, don't use bullet points.
Okay, so it has to all be like one like.
Yeah,
together.
but you could say my prediction is this. My dependent and independent variables are this. Like you can write one sentence after the other, but you should not write bullet points. What's up?
So like if it's not random sampling and you're only targeting like a certain population, like would you say?
But you'd still want to randomly sample within that population,
Okay.
right? For your groups. And then make a prediction. Say if I do this, then this will happen. General strategies. If your question asks you for a term, you are going to need to tell what that term is, right? So explain how phytochrome changes from active to inactive form. You would say phytochrome, a photoreceptor in plants that allows for different growth responses, can form PFR and PR, right? So that's just giving it more information on that. Contradiction statements. So this one is different than what you guys have learned in the past because I know that your AP US History and your AP World History teachers have told you something different. So let's say in AP US History, you wrote George Washington was the first president, George Washington loved apples, George Washington played chess, George Washington fought in the Revolutionary War, George Washington fought in World War II, George Washington was born in 1950. Do you get the points for saying that George Washington was the first president of the United States?
Yeah.
Yes. In biology, you would not, because you also wrote that George Washington fought in World War II and was born in 1950, which would have precluded him from being the first president of the United States, right? But in AP US History and AP World, that doesn't count. You can't contradict yourself. It doesn't matter as long as you have correct statements. So this is what a contradiction statement would look like in biology. If the question was explain how phytochrome changes from active to inactive form, and you wrote PFR is the active form of phytochrome and occurs when the plant is exposed to red light, this will cause the plant to grow up rather than out. Okay? So, PFR is the active form of phytochrome and occurs when the plant is exposed to red light. That is a correct statement. Good job. This will cause the plant to grow up rather than out. That is incorrect, right? But it doesn't contradict this. Okay? This, however, says PFR is the active form of phytochrome occurs when the plant is exposed to red light. This will cause the plant to grow up rather than out, which will allow the plant to grow out of the shade and into direct sunlight. Oof, this is a problem because out of the shade and into direct sunlight, you already said that it was in red light, which is direct sunlight. So this statement contradicts this statement, so then you get no points, right? Moral of the story is here, don't try to be an all-star. Once you've answered the question, stop talking. Not only are you wasting time, but you are writing down things that could possibly contradict what you've written originally and then cause you to lose a point, right? Does that make sense? All right, multiple answer questions. If a question asks for multiple things, only give the number that they ask. If it says, you know, identify 8 organelles that are involved in, identify 3 organelles that are involved in the endomembrane system, and you give 8, and you say organelles that are involved in the endomembrane system include the peroxisome, the chloroplast, the mitochondria, the endoplasmic reticulum, the Golgi apparatus, the nuclear envelope, the lysosome, and the cell membrane, right? You get 0 points for that because the first 3 that you listed are not involved in the endomembrane system. The next 5 that you listed were, but they asked for 3, and you listed 8, and the first 3 that you listed were wrong. So you get 0 points, right? That's a very important thing. That's just wasting your time. You're not getting any points for it. You don't need to go in order. You can answer any question at any time. Question 1, you could answer question 1 last if you wanted to, okay? But within a question, you should answer the questions in order by A, B, C, and D. And the reason for this is not because you have to, but because usually they walk you through it. Point A is needed for point B, and point B is needed for point C, and point C is needed for point D. And so if you don't do it and you just jump right into point D, you're probably going to get it wrong, okay? Handwriting doesn't count, but it does. The people who are grading your exams are humans who have decided to take on the totally ridiculous task of grading every AP exam in the entire United States, right? Every AP biology exam. The way that the readers work is they go into a hotel conference room that has these round tables and is, you know, silent, and then they read like 10,000 exams a day. And not the whole exam, but just a single part of a single question. That's what they would be involved with, right? And then they grade 10,000 a day. Sounds terrible. So imagine that on day 1, you are the 15th exam that somebody is reading, right? So they go through and they're reading it, and you've got kind of illegible handwriting. They're like, oh, I think they said this here, and I think they also said this here. I think this word says this. They'll give you the benefit of the doubt, right? But if it's the 4th day that they've been doing it in your exam 9,500 on the 4th day, they're going to be like, can't read this, 0, and move on, right? So just know that the people that are grading these are humans, and even though handwriting shouldn't count, it does count, so you should give yourself a leg up by trying to write legibly. Multiple choice section, 69 total questions, 90 minutes total. Questions 1 through 63 are multiple choice. Questions 64 through 69, which are labeled 121 through 126, are grid in, right? So, you're going to run out of time on this. I guarantee you will not have enough time to answer all the multiple choice questions. Because of that, you should answer the grid-in questions first, right? The reason for that is that a grid-in question has 5 boxes for you to grid in numbers. A multiple choice question has A, B, C, and D. If you run out of time and you need to bubble in A, B, C, or D, you will have a 25% chance of getting the correct answer. If you get to the last questions on the test, which are the grid-ins, and you need to guess an answer, you need to pick the correct 5-digit number. You cannot do that. I mean, you can, theoretically speaking, but you will probably not pick the correct 5-digit number when you are trying to grid something in, right? They are the most missed questions. They have the highest percentage of people that miss the questions are those grid-in questions, but they are generally pretty easy questions. The reason why they're the highest missed is because they're at the end of the test and people run out of time and they don't answer them at all, right? So, for the rest of the test, you should know that the test is very long, right? Once you get done with this test, your brain is going to be destroyed. There's going to be so many graphs and passages and things like that to look through that it will absolutely drain you, okay? For instance, your practice test that we're going to take is 69 questions. It's on 62 pieces of paper, right? 69 questions, 62 pieces of paper. That means that it's roughly 1 question per page, right? That's because there's all kinds of graphs and passages and things like that. If you get to something and it says 4 questions for the next, questions 8 through 14 refer to this passage, you should go ahead and read the whole passage because that's a lot of questions, right? Read the whole passage, then go through and answer the questions and refer back to the passage. If there is, 7 paragraphs for a single question, don't read all 7 paragraphs. Read the question and then try to find it in those 7 paragraphs, right? Because you're not going to have enough time if you do that. Non-passage-based questions should take you no more than a minute. Never take more than 60 seconds on a non-passage-based question. Otherwise, like I said, you're going to run out of time. Never, ever, 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 ever leave a question blank. You have a 25% chance of getting the question right just by bubbling it in, right? If you can eliminate 1 answer choice, you have a 33% chance. If you can eliminate 2 answer choices as being stupid, you have a 50% chance. And remember, 50% is all you need to pass this exam, right? So all you need to do to pass the exam is eliminate 2 answer choices on each multiple choice question. And then you will statistically pass, right? That's very easy to do. A lot of times, the questions are written where 2 answer choices are obviously wrong, right? Don't stop reading the answer choices once you find the one that you think is correct. That's because 3 types of questions exist. On some answer choices, there's going to be true statements that don't apply to the question. So if the question said, what mechanism allows for the chloroplast to produce ATP, and answer choice A is the chloroplast is the result of the endosymbiotic theory. And you're like, I know that it is. I remember that. Yes, endosymbiosis, chloroplast, boom, A, move on, right? Then if you don't read the other choices, you're not going to see that point C says that the thylakoids can pump H+ ions into their thylakoid space, and then the H+ ions flow out through ATP synthase, right? And that's obviously a better answer choice, but you didn't see it because you answered the true statement that was not part of the question or didn't apply to the question asked. Some questions are going to have multiple correct answers. We hope this doesn't happen because this indicates that it was a poorly written question, but it does happen sometimes where there are multiple answers that could be correct, but one of them is more correct than the other ones, right? In which case, you're going to try to pick the most correct answer. And then there's the opposite of that with the other type of poorly written question where there are no 100% correct answers. Some of them are more correct than others, but none of them are 100% correct. And in that case, you're going to try to, you know, sort of step into the reader's brain, or to the question writer's brain, and try to be like, what were they trying to make me answer here? Like, what was the point of this? And a lot of times it'll be relatively obvious which direction they were trying to go, even if that's not the correct answer, or not a fully correct answer. On test day, you should bring a number 2 pencil. You should bring your own calculator. You can use any calculator you want as long as it's not a cell phone and it doesn't have a full QWERTY keyboard and it doesn't have internet access or anything like that. Okay? That means that within this, you can do whatever. I can tell you this right now, even if you take all the time to upload your entire biology book into the program section of your calculator, that will not help you. And the reason for that is that you're going to run out of time. Even if you don't ever look at your calculator, you're not going to have enough time to answer all the questions on this exam and read all the passages. And you're much better off reading the words that are on the exam than you are the words that you've programmed into your calculator. Make sure you bring a blue or black pen for FRQ, and then a wristwatch or a stopwatch to keep track of time. It cannot be a smartwatch, can't be a Fitbit, can't be a Apple Watch, can't be a Samsung Gear, none of that. Okay, it has to be a totally dumb, you know, Timex Ironman or something like that, or an actual stopwatch that you can leave on your desk. But it's an important thing to have to budget your time. Bring a snack, bring a water bottle. Like I said, you're going to want to have something during the break so that your brain doesn't explode, right? Because it probably will. Questions on that? The test this year is on May 13th. May 13th. That is the second Monday of AP exams.